10 days before the holidays in a small Pennsylvania town. A new mother is excited by her baby's first Christmas. But when they disappear without a trace, the holiday turns tragic. Investigators suspect her husband is somehow responsible. But with little evidence, they called on the FBI to find the answers before time ran out for the missing mother and child.
A woman and her infant son vanish. The husband is frantic. The clues are scarce, but hopes linger, even as the hours and days tick by without a word. Was she on the run or the victim of foul play? I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It was an investigation filled with blind alleys and dead ends. In order to go forward, we had to revisit the past.
Catasauqua, Pennsylvania, 1 hour north of Philadelphia. A quiet, blue-collar town, a safe place to raise a family. By December 15th, 1994, the town was preparing for the holiday season. The house at 740 Front Street was already decorated. Inside, 26-year-old Joanne Katrinak, happily married and a new mother, was especially excited about the holidays. It would be the first Christmas for her 4-month-old son, Alex. Joanne and her mother-in-law, Veronica, planned to spend the day at a nearby mall.
Hey. Yeah.
Now Joanne called to say that Alex was dressed and ready. They'd be right over.
Run away.
Joanne wanted to find the perfect gift for her husband, Andy. They'd been married less than 2 years. And though they didn't have a lot of money, Joanne had been saving for the holiday. Before Joanne had met Andy, she had had some bad relationships. Her first husband was abusive. The marriage had ended in divorce. But she was happy now. Her husband, Andy Katrinak, came home a little after 6 o'clock that evening. He was self-employed as a contractor and sometimes worked long hours. Before he'd met Joanne, Andy had been a confirmed bachelor. But it seemed that finding this kind and beautiful woman had changed his life. Usually, Joanne and Alex were waiting for him when he came home. But not tonight. That didn't seem to worry Andy. After all, it was Christmas time and the mall traffic would be heavy. He saw that Joanne had left some chicken to defrost. He settled in to relax and wait for his family. An hour went by, then another. Still, Andy didn't seem concerned. He watched TV and drank another beer. At 8 p.m., Andy finally decided to check on his wife. His first call was to his mother, Veronica.
Hi, Mom. You seen Joanne?
He knew Joanne had planned to shop with her.
Well, it's,
But now his mother said
now.
Joanne had never come by.
No, well, did you didn't
Nor
hear
had
from
she
her?
answered her phone calls.
Well, no, she didn't. That's why I'm calling you, because I hadn't seen her. I hadn't heard from her yet. No. Well, what'd you guys do?
Veronica
around.
was worried. She said she
All right,
and her husband, Andrew Sr., would be right over. While he waited for his parents, Andy checked the house to see if anything was amiss. In the basement, he found the door leading outside, open. A door he and Joanne never used. The lock had been pried away from the door frame. Andy immediately called the police. Two officers from the Catasauqua Police Department responded. By then, Andy's parents had arrived. Andy told police the events of the day.
Well, I got it.
The shopping trip that never happened. The apparent
Yeah,
disappearance
there's
of
a picture
Joanne
right there
and
of
little
my
Alex.
family, taken this year.
He claimed they had been abducted,
So,
and officers agreed that was a possibility.
She and the baby were supposed to pick me up.
But it was also
we got that
plausible
done
that
last
Joanne had
month.
left on her
Yeah.
own and taken her child with her.
well, yeah, I
Or
can't
maybe
remember
Andy
that,
had somehow
right?
been involved.
Which is a little, she didn't hear from her, and she was supposed to meet with her.
Veronica described her phone call with Joanne and the subsequent calls that went unanswered.
I had my coat on and waited, and she never showed up.
Here, you guys see this?
Andy now showed police the padlock that had been broken off the basement door.
Yeah.
But the officers were not convinced it was related to the missing mother and child. That night, Andy stayed home by the phone while his father searched the surrounding area for Joanne and Alex. At 3 in the morning, Andrew Sr. had found something and brought his son to see it.
What is this?
Joanne's tan Toyota was backed into a spot in the parking lot of McCarty's Tavern,
What is this?
down the street from the Katrinak's home.
That's her keys, Andy.
Inside were Joanne's keys and her small canister of mace. Again, Andy called Catasauqua police. This time, police suspected foul play. But the local force lacked the resources and experience needed to lead the investigation. So they contacted Pennsylvania state troopers for assistance. With the possibility of an abduction, Major Robert Wirtz looked to the most likely suspect, Joanne's husband, Andy Katrinak.
There was a lot of looking into the family life and looking at what Andrew did on that particular day and those sorts of things. One of the things that you're always forced to do in these types of investigations is look at family members.
State police arrived at Andy's house the next morning.
Come over here. You see that right there?
Andy told them that overnight he had noticed something else, a cut phone line in the basement.
Crime scene down here?
One of two separate phone lines in the house.
And I left it for you.
The one cut serviced the cordless phone, while the other serviced the kitchen phone. It appeared to investigators that whoever cut the line knew where to look and which one to cut. State police evidence technicians also found a partial boot print on the basement floor and tool marks on the door frame where the padlock was pried off.
Laundry upstairs. No, she didn't come down.
As crime scene technicians checked the house, they found nothing to remove suspicion from Andy. In the master bedroom, there was no indication Joanne had packed for a long trip. Andy confirmed that his wife's clothes all seemed to be in the closet, and the couple's suitcases were under the bed where he said they always kept them. Technicians found no blood or other signs of foul play. They dusted for fingerprints around the room's entry points, but found only Andy's and Joanne's. In the baby's room, There were also no signs that little Alex had been taken on a long trip, and no indication of a struggle or robbery. At the State Police Barracks garage, evidence technicians processed Joanne's car. They hoped something left behind could lead them closer to the missing mother and child. On the headrest of the driver's seat, they found 6 dirty blonde hairs. One was partially smeared with a dark red substance, maybe blood. But nothing immediately pointed to Joanne and Alex's whereabouts. As lead investigator, Trooper Bob Egan was suspicious of the way the car had been found.
There were a couple things that led Andy Katrinak to believe that his wife did not back that car, and number one is that she never used that parking lot to park her vehicle. They had a parking lot in back of their house, and number two, she never backed the car in. When she parked into a parking space, she always pulled in front of the vehicle first. She was very bad at backing up.
3 days had passed since Andy's wife and son disappeared. His parents posted flyers throughout his neighborhood and in Catasauqua's shopping district.
Tell me, have you seen this woman or the baby?
Anywhere Joanne and Alex
No,
might
I'm
have
sorry,
visited.
I have not.
This is a picture of our daughter-in-law. This is our grandchild.
With still no word from Joanne or a kidnapper, troopers delved further into Andy's background.
Anything like that? No, I just got
They found him anxious when he spoke of his former days as a semi-pro boxer in Las Vegas.
No,
He was good with his fists and earned his living as an instructor when he first moved to Pennsylvania. Now a private contractor, Andy barely made enough to pay the bills. A wife, a house, and a baby strained the new father's resources.
Yeah.
Troopers asked to see his financial records, including insurance documents, bank statements, and phone records.
I got some checks.
He told them that his wife had only minimal life insurance.
I know you probably would have wanted phone records, so I brought that down too.
On the day she disappeared with his son, Andy said he had been with his father, building a room addition for a client who lived a few miles from his home. Troopers were not satisfied. They suspected he may have still been hiding something. They demanded that Andy take a polygraph test.
Right now, do you know where your wife is located?
No, I don't.
The first test showed that Andy had not been deceptive regarding his family's disappearance. But investigators needed to be sure,
No.
Did you
so they
kill
tested him
Joanne?
again.
No, I didn't.
The results were conclusive.
No.
Andy was telling the truth about his missing wife and baby.
Are you intentionally
Investigators
withholding
cleared
any
the husband
information
as a
about their
suspect.
disappearance?
No, I'm not.
By now, Joanne and Alex had been missing for 4 days, and investigators still had no solid leads. Whether it had been a desertion or an abduction, it was possible the woman and child had crossed state lines. On December 19, 1994, state police called on the FBI for help. Special Agent Dave Rowe from the FBI's Allentown office joined the effort.
We began our investigation by identifying, locating, and interviewing virtually all of the relatives, virtually all of the friends, former work colleagues, anybody and everybody who was either related to or acquainted with Andy, Joanne, and Alex.
Open. Coffee? Yes, thank you.
Local, state, and federal agencies funneled their resources into the search for the missing woman and child. 6 days before Christmas, it seemed as if they had vanished without a trace. Joanne Katrinak, a 26-year-old mother, and her 4-month-old son, Alex, had mysteriously disappeared from their Catasauqua, Pennsylvania home. Her husband, Andy, had been cleared of suspicion. Now investigators traveled across Pennsylvania state lines to question Joanne's ex-husband, who lived and worked in New Jersey. Mike Jack had married Joanne in 1991. They were divorced just a few months later, amidst allegations that Jack was abusive. Maybe Joanne had decided to rekindle the relationship. Or perhaps her ex had come to win her back. But investigators found Jack had a solid alibi for the date of Joanne's disappearance. Agents also pursued people from Andy's past,
What are you doing here? Well,
including his ex-girlfriend, Pat Rohrer.
December 14th.
Anything wrong?
An FBI agent interviewed Rohrer at her home in North Carolina.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I keep all
He
kinds
found
of
she
receipts.
too had a solid alibi for the day Joanne and Alex had vanished.
I'll tell you what, I really appreciate that, man.
Okay.
Back in Catasauqua, investigators returned to McCarty's Tavern, where Joanne's car had been found the day she had disappeared. Maybe someone had noticed her, or whoever had parked the car. Troopers and agents eventually interviewed everyone who had been at the bar that night, but no one had seen a thing.
You working last Thursday night?
Yes, it was.
Investigators also canvassed the Katrinac neighborhood. One neighbor directed them to a handyman who rented a room down the street. He'd done repair work in several local homes. Detectives soon discovered he had a criminal record for breaking and entering. He seemed a promising suspect. He admitted to police he had had some run-ins with the law, but swore he had no knowledge of Joanne and Alex's disappearance. He agreed to come in for further questioning. Investigators learned the handyman lived in a lean-to by a river near the Katrinac's house during the summer months. The state police canine team searched the shelter for any evidence that Joanne and Alex had been there. They found nothing, and the handyman was cleared. Another dead end. For frustrated investigators, precious time slipped away as community concern grew.
Man.
State Police Major Robert Wirtz helped establish hotlines to elicit the public's help.
There was obviously a lot of concerns in the community as to what occurred. So we had a command post set up here at the barracks with a number of telephone lines coming into the command post. Those phone numbers were given to the public, and we in fact did get information from the public.
Reports of sightings poured in. One resident reported seeing Joanne with an unidentified man near railroad tracks behind the Katrinac's home. She was carrying a baby and seemed frightened by the man pulling her further into the brush against her will. In response, FBI agents and state police immediately conducted a massive line search of a 4-mile stretch near the railroad tracks. The search continued through the night. They scanned the area inch by inch as choppers circled overhead. But again, investigators found nothing. Trooper Joe Kosovar, now co-lead investigator with his partner Bob Egan, recalls that reports of sightings continued.
They saw her along the railroad tracks, they saw her on an airplane, they saw her in a convenience store with the baby, but none of them checked out. They were false leads, and apparently people who they saw and thought they saw were two different people.
Christmas passed and spring began, with still no word of Joanne and Alex. Then on April 9th, a farmer was tilling his field in Heidelberg Township, 15 miles northwest of Catasauqua. he saw what looked like a pile of clothes at the field's edge. When he walked over to investigate, he encountered a horrifying sight. Human remains. Four months after the disappearance of Joanne Katrinak and her infant son, Alex, a farmer found the decaying bodies of a mother and child at the edge of his Pennsylvania field. The FBI and troopers arrived immediately. Dental records would later confirm what they already suspected. The bodies were Alex and Joanne Katrinak's. Joanne lay on her back, a diaper bag still on her shoulder. She had been shot once in the head and beaten about the face. Alex was face down on his mother's stomach, dressed in the blue snowsuit he'd worn on his ill-fated trip to meet his grandmother. The bodies were 50 feet past the end of a trail that ran through the woods. Nearby, crime scene technicians found a baby bottle and a rattle. To Trooper Bob Egan, the location of the items was significant.
You could see items that had fallen to the ground almost in a sequence as if an assault started and Joanne was walking or running away from the assault, and she was dropping items along the way.
It appeared the killer had driven up to the end of the trail, and from there had forced Joanne to walk the remaining 50 feet. Evidence technicians would spend 15 hours searching the area, but they found no shell casings, fingerprints, footprints, or murder weapons. In the hopes that the forest debris might yield answers, they collected leaves and dirt from beneath the bodies and sent them to the police lab for closer examination. For Major Robert Wirtz and the others who'd worked the case for months, the finality of this brutal murder evoked a barrage of emotions.
When the bodies were found, there was a period of time there when it was very difficult for the officers that were assigned to this investigation. Took it very personally, and it was hard, because I think they were holding out hope that, she was going to be found alive.
With the mysterious disappearance officially deemed a homicide, the case remained under state jurisdiction. But the FBI never stopped actively assisting.
Hello, Linda. Dave Rowe here. The fact that somebody would abduct a new mother and a 4-month-old infant, everybody can identify with that. And once you become aware of that, you want to be part of the investigation.
An autopsy revealed that Joanne had been shot once with a .22 caliber bullet and beaten 19 times with a blunt object. The fact that there had been 2 modes of attack was a telling clue for Trooper Joe Kosovar.
Based on the absence of empty shell casings and the fact that the victim had received 1 shot and numerous blows to the head, led me to believe that the gun malfunctioned.
The medical examiner was unable to determine exactly how baby Alex was killed, whether he'd been suffocated or left to die of exposure. Police continued to analyze the physical evidence found at the crime scene. To help build the case, they brought in prosecutor Mike McIntyre of the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office.
We found 2 more hairs that first match the 6 hairs found on that headrest in color and length.
But the hairs would have to be examined forensically to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they matched. A Pennsylvania State Police forensic scientist conducted the lab analysis. The results confirmed what investigators had suspected. The hairs belonged to the same person. And the substance on one of them was determined to be human blood, containing DNA consistent with Joanne's. But to whom did the hairs belong? Tests quickly ruled out the Katrinaks and several of Joanne's friends who had access to the car. Pennsylvania State Police were baffled.
How far are we on this?
Again, they turned to the FBI for help. The FBI sent a behavioral profiler from Washington, D.C. A profiler can help narrow the search for suspects by detailing the type of person responsible for a crime through that person's behavioral characteristics. Profilers study a variety of crime-related information, including case reports, geography, timing, and the victim's habits. Then they revisit the crime scenes to read the locations for clues to the killer's behavior. Investigators first took the profiler to the place the bodies were found. He would look for anything that might reveal the killer's signature. The area was so far from the abduction site, the profiler was convinced the killer had been here before. The profiler also hypothesized the killer had been male because the attack had been so brutal. The abduction had taken place in broad daylight, which offered another hint. The killer would be someone comfortable being seen in the small town of Catasauqua, and someone who perhaps knew the family's habits and the layout of the house. By fleshing out this portrait of the killer, the profiler gave investigators new direction in a frustrating case. But troopers needed a name that fit the profile. To find that name, troopers drove Andy around Heidelberg Township, close to where the bodies were found. They hoped to prompt his memory of someone who knew this rural area. They asked if Joanne had ever visited here. Was there a friend or a family member who lived nearby? Andy could think of no one. Disappointed, investigators returned to State Police headquarters. Then, just as Andy was about to leave, he remembered something. He did know someone who knew Heidelberg Township, and also his home in Catasauqua. His ex-girlfriend, Pat Rohrer, had once managed a stable in Heidelberg.
And with that, he tells me that he couldn't tell me the exact place, what it was called, because he couldn't remember the name, but he could give me directions on how to get there. So I told him, I said, well, tell me. As he started to tell me the directions of how to get to where Patty Rohrer was boarding a horse and taking care of horses, well, I knew he was taking me right to the area where Joanne and the baby were found.
We used to go together.
Pat Rohrer and Andy had lived together briefly in Pennsylvania. He told investigators he once visited her at the stable. But they'd broken up in 1989, and she had moved back to North Carolina.
How you been? Yeah? It's all right.
Then in the spring of 1991, before Andy met Joanne, Rohrer had visited him unexpectedly after a fight with her most recent boyfriend.
I didn't say anything. Hey, look.
Andy was sympathetic. He let Rohrer stay for a few days, though their relationship remained purely a friendship.
So tell me about it.
Then she returned to North Carolina.
Fresno Road.
Not long after that, Andy met Joanne.
We lived together for a while.
As he now told state troopers,
and then we
it was
split,
love at
kinda
first
bad.
sight.
You know.
They were married soon after, in the spring of 1993. They agreed they wanted children, and less than a year later, Joanne was pregnant.
Hey, sweetie.
Hey, baby.
Alex was born in August of 1994.
That you think is so adorable? Yeah. You know what I think it's
Now Andy
he's
told
just telling
investigators
something.
about something that had happened 3 days before his wife and son disappeared.
I will. Hello?
On December 12th, Joanne answered a phone call.
May I tell him who's
It was Pat Rohrer.
It's her. Hat.
What does she want?
What do you think she wants?
Joanne told Rohrer that Andy was married now and that they had a baby. She told Rohrer not to call again.
Please, don't
Then
call us.
Joanne hung up on her.
I used to date a girl.
Though Andy knew Pat had a temper, he dismissed the idea that she might seek revenge.
Go together.
Then the investigation took an unexpected turn. The second mother and child were found brutally murdered. The pair, who resembled Joanne and Alex, were discovered in a retail store dressing room in nearby Collegeville, Pennsylvania. Investigators now wondered if a serial killer was on the loose, preying on mothers and children in Pennsylvania. While investigating the homicide of Joanne and Alex Katranak, Pennsylvania State Police responded to another double murder in a retail store just 45 miles away. The victims were a second young mother and her baby. Police feared a serial killer was on the prowl. They quickly arrested the suspect, the store owner's son. While he confessed to this killing, he had an airtight alibi for the day Joanne and Alex were slain. Now police turned their attention to Andy Katranak's ex-girlfriend, Pat Rohrer.
Here we got a couple things to run down.
Rohrer was a long shot, a brunette instead of a blonde, and a woman, though the profiler believed the murderer was male. But she was familiar with both the abduction and murder sites. Then Trooper Joe Kosovar recalled that he'd worked on a case that was strangely similar. He phoned Special Agent Dave Rowe.
Trooper Joe Kosovar recollected that he had investigated a homicide some years earlier where the cause of death was blunt force blows to the head. The assailant was determined to be a woman, while 1, 2, 3, 4 blows by an adult male would produce the same damage that a woman might have to strike 15, 20, 25 blows to accomplish.
Joanne Katranak had sustained 19 blows. But could a woman have killed her and her infant as well? In May of 1995, 6 months after the murders, troopers Bob Egan and Joe Kosovar traveled to North Carolina. The FBI had helped coordinate a meeting with the Lexington County Sheriff's Office. Together, authorities from the 2 states would interview Pat Rohrer at her attorney's office. Rohrer's mother was also there.
You exercise the horses, can you tell us more?
Rohrer expanded upon her original alibis. On December 15th, the day of the crime, she said she'd visited a local tanning salon. That evening, she'd taken her regular Thursday night dance lesson at the Cowboys Nightlife bar.
Why'd you guys split up?
Rohrer admitted she'd worked at the stable in Heidelberg Township, but said she hadn't been back to Pennsylvania since she'd visited Andy after the fight with her boyfriend. She also swore she'd never owned a gun. Lieutenant Tony Roberson of the Lexington County Sheriff's Department helped agents and troopers investigate her statements.
The first thing that they wanted to do was discredit her alibis to find out whether they could be corroborated or whether they could be found to be invalid.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Investigators visited the tanning salon Rohrer claimed to have used on the day of the murders. Prosecutor Mike McIntyre remembers this alibi quickly proved false.
The owner of the tanning salon, Mrs. Simerson, said, hey, you know what? Something's wrong here, because we were closed on that particular day that Pat Rohrer says she was in getting a tan, because that's my husband's birthday, and we were over at the shopping mart in some city about 50 miles away, and I remember that, and I have a receipt for you from the shopping mall to show that we were there.
Excuse me, sir.
At the Cowboys nightlife bar, the dance instructor knew Rohrer as a regular.
We're investigating a murder up in Pennsylvania, and we understand that...
The club's sign-in sheet showed she'd been there the Thursday before December 15th and the Thursday after, but not on the 15th.
And she was there.
Investigators secured Rohrer's phone records. They showed she'd used the phone every day of December 1994, except from the 12th through the 15th. Despite her alibis, Rohrer could not prove she'd been in North Carolina on the day of the killings. More incriminating still, her police record revealed a history of violence.
She has violent tendencies, has had them in the past. She was charged in a neighboring county, in Forsyth County, of getting into a fight over a man at a bar. And she was arrested that night.
But investigators were still missing one key piece of evidence, the murder weapon. Rohrer continued to deny she'd ever owned a gun. But investigators kept digging. At a North Carolina stable, they found one of her ex-boyfriends, Walter Blaylock. He distinctly remembered that Rohrer had bought a handgun for $50 at a yard sale. It was a .22 caliber Jennings, which they had used for target shooting in Rohrer's backyard.
Just put your hands on me, girl.
The last time he had seen it was during an intense argument.
Calm down, Pat. I'm not going to calm down. Don't do something foolish. Please. Get out there. Settle down. Put a gun down.
Now Blaylock told Trooper Egan the gun had a curious flaw.
He went on to describe the handgun as being a junky piece of junk type of handgun that often after the first time you shot it, it jammed, not allowing you to fire a second shot. Now this fed into the theory why somebody would be shot once and then beaten about the head.
The FBI helped coordinate interstate efforts to secure a probable cause warrant to search Rohrer's North Carolina home for the murder weapon. They arrived with the warrant on July 24th, 1995.
What are you doing here?
Have a warrant.
Despite a thorough search, they didn't find the gun. But they did find numerous spent .22 caliber shell casings in the backyard.
State Police. Detective Egan, Detective Kosovar, ma'am.
Only when police told Rohrer that they knew she owned a handgun did she admit to it.
This gun in my house.
But she insisted Blaylock had taken it with him when he'd moved out about a month before the murders.
No, I have not.
Why did you buy the gun?
I told you.
The case against Rohrer was
with
growing,
him, but I do not
but it
have
was
this
built
gun,
on
okay?
circumstantial evidence.
Just because he wanted this gun.
Did you get it? She could have dumped it.
And strangely, the only physical evidence, the hairs from the car on the murder site, didn't seem to fit. The hairs were dirty blonde. Rohrer's hair was brown. Trooper Joe Kosovar wondered if it could have been dyed at the time of the killings. He learned that shortly before the murders, Rohrer had ridden in a rodeo competition and won. Kosovar contacted the event organizers, hoping they'd taken a photo of her. His inquiry paid off. They sent him the photo. As he'd guessed, Rohrer's hair was dirty blonde.
The photograph was given to our crime lab personnel, and they compared the color of the photograph of the hair with the color of the hairs that were found in the vehicle and decided that they should further investigate those hairs.
Detectives obtained a warrant to collect blood and hair samples from Pat Rohrer. If evidence analysts could match her hair to those from Joanne's car on the murder site, the troopers could make their arrest. But they would need to rely on a test so new that it would take more than a year for the test to be approved. Until then, the prime suspect of the double murder would remain free. After an investigation that had lasted almost a year, detectives had a strong suspect in the double murder of Joanne Katranak and her infant son, Alex. With a search warrant, they obtained blood and hair samples from Pat Rohrer, the former girlfriend of Joanne's husband, Andy. Rohrer was now pregnant with the child of her current boyfriend. Forensic scientists would attempt to match her hair samples with hair found at the crime scenes. The Pennsylvania State Police Lab determined Rohrer's hairs were microscopically consistent with the recovered hairs. But investigators needed more proof, a match at the cellular level. They extracted Rohrer's DNA sequence from her blood samples and attempted to compare it with the DNA and hairs from the crime scenes. But there was a problem making a match. Joseph DeZino, Unit Chief at the DNA Analysis Unit 2 at the FBI lab, explains.
When hairs are found at a crime scene, they're normally naturally shed hairs that don't have much tissue upon the root. And if they don't have much tissue upon the root, there's very, very little DNA contained in those hairs. And therefore, our experience has shown us that nuclear DNA analysis will fail.
In this case, only one of the hairs found at the crime scene contained enough skin tissue necessary for nuclear DNA analysis. But there was a great risk. To conduct the test, examiners would have to destroy that sample. If the test was inconclusive, there was no way to repeat the process. They needed a way to test the other hairs that held no skin tissue. A possible solution lay in a new process being pioneered by the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. Mitochondrial DNA testing.
This was brand new. To my knowledge, this was the first forensics laboratory in the United States to bring this new analysis online.
Because the test was so new, it would take more than a year to be certain the results could be scientifically reliable. Mitochondrial DNA testing uses the DNA contained in the cell's mitochondria, or organelles. Since there is more mitochondrial DNA than nuclear DNA in hair cells, it is easier for examiners to retrieve the mitochondrial DNA. With 5 hair samples to test, examiners could repeat the test and obtain more reliable results.
With mitochondrial DNA analysis, we're over 90% successful obtaining DNA from hairs that are naturally shed, hairs without root. And we only need about 1 inch of hair in order to obtain a result, generally speaking.
To attempt a mitochondrial DNA match, first the DNA sequence in a hair cell's mitochondria is isolated. Then its sequence is plotted and compared to the suspect's known DNA sequence, in this case taken from Pat Rohrer's blood cells. Both DNA sequences matched. Forensic scientist Joseph DeZino explains what that meant.
If a hair from a crime scene is found to have the same mitochondrial DNA type as a blood sample from a suspect, our reports state that that suspect cannot be excluded as a source of that hair from the crime scene. Therefore, Patricia Rohrer could not be excluded as a source of these hairs.
However, without nuclear DNA confirmation, the result was not absolutely conclusive. Now scientists examined the hair sample with skin for a nuclear DNA match. It corroborated the mitochondrial match. There was no question that Patricia Rohrer had left those hairs behind. It was a pivotal moment in the case. In the early morning of June 24, 1997, investigators arrived at Rohrer's home with an arrest warrant.
Pat Rohrer, I've got a warrant for your arrest. I need you to come with us, ma'am, please.
Yes?
Deputy, go with her.
The female detective followed Rohrer upstairs to keep an eye on her as she dressed herself and her 18-month-old daughter. It seemed a routine safety precaution, but it yielded some of the most damaging evidence in the case.
During the time that Pat was trying to settle her baby down and get dressed, the female detective, Suzanne Pearson, was present in the bedroom. And it was at this time that she overheard a conversation that Pat Rohrer had with her baby. Pat's baby's name is Nicole, and what the detective overheard was Pat Rohrer saying to Nicole, Nicole, if I would have known I was going to get caught, I would have never brought you into this world. It was something that Suzanne Pearson, the detective, documented as soon as possible, and this was very damaging.
More than 3 years after the murder of Joanne Katranak and her baby, Pat Rohrer was finally under arrest. She was flown to Pennsylvania to face murder charges. Preparing for trial, prosecutors pieced together the terrifying events of Joanne and Alex Katranak's last day. On December 15, 1994, Pat Rohrer had broken into the basement of the Katranak's home, knowing Andy was out and Joanne was alone with Alex. Joanne had no idea Rohrer was downstairs as she called her mother-in-law and packed up baby Alex for a shopping trip.
Right.
From the basement, Rohrer heard every word Joanne said.
All right, I'll see you in a bit. Bye.
And she remembered the house from a visit with Andy 3 years earlier. She knew where to look for the 2 phone lines and which one to cut so Joanne couldn't call for help. Joanne carried Alex outside, still unaware that Pat was in the house. Rohrer heard Joanne leave and went outside to catch up with her. Joanne didn't see Rohrer sneak up behind her, carrying a .22 caliber Jennings.
Oh, get in the car. Oh my God. Get in the car.
Rohrer jumped into the back seat with the baby and forced Joanne to drive. Joanne must have been terrified as she drove with Rohrer's gun at her head, afraid for herself, and more so for her helpless 4-month-old baby. Rohrer directed Joanne to an obscure horse trail in Heidelberg Township. As Rohrer forced her further into the woods, Joanne in her terror dropped Alex's rattle and then his bottle. Rohrer fired once, but then her gun jammed, and she began bludgeoning Joanne. She may have suffocated baby Alex, or simply left him to die slowly of exposure to the December elements. Then Rohrer parked the car at McCarty's Tavern and fled from Pennsylvania. Prosecutors built an airtight case, using evidence investigators had meticulously collected. It was a concerted effort by many in law enforcement, unwilling to let this woman and child perish in silence.
As investigators, we have a responsibility, and that responsibility is to be the voice of the victim, is to gather the information and speak for the victims that can no longer speak.
Close 6.
The jury found Pat Rohrer guilty of 2 counts of kidnapping and 2 of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Legally, the case was closed, and for the town of Catasauqua, the mystery was solved. If not for the advanced forensic technology of the FBI, this brutal double murderer might still be free. An armored car vanished during a routine stop. Carrying nearly $1 million, it was supposed to be impenetrable. Investigators didn't know if the driver was involved or if he had been ambushed. FBI agents and local detectives began to suspect a group of former law officers in the heist. It would take determination and high technology to track the robbers and make them pay for their silent strike.
Money may not be the root of all evil, but for some men, $1 million is enough to justify murder. Even men sworn to uphold the law can sometimes be tempted. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When robbery turned to murder, the FBI would discover that a killer might be among them.
The Arrowhead Mall, Glendale, Arizona. November 28, 1994. At 1:30 p.m., a van pulled up outside a department store at the mall. It was an unmarked, fully armored Wells Fargo vehicle. Several companies use these customized vans since they are less conspicuous targets for robbery. Following company protocol, the driver remained inside the van while the courier went to pick up cash from the store. The van was bulletproof, and its doors could not be forced open from the outside. Inside the department store office, the courier exchanged empty bags for those filled with the weekend's receipts. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving. The cash pickup followed the busiest shopping weekend of the year. When the courier returned to the parking lot minutes later, the armored van and the driver were gone. He notified police immediately. The 911 call came to the Glendale, Arizona Police Department. They dispatched units to the scene and sent word to the FBI. The nearest FBI field office is in Phoenix, 20 miles from the mall. Because the money in the van was federally insured, the FBI opened a case. Agents headed out to the scene. Glendale detectives arrived at the mall first. They began interviewing the courier. He said he had been gone only 4 minutes when he discovered the van and his partner, John McGosh, had disappeared. The courier estimated the amount of cash, checks, and coins in the van to be just over $1 million. Detectives interviewed others at the mall. None reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. FBI agents soon arrived from Phoenix. Evidence technicians had processed the area. Where the van had been parked, they found a cigarette butt and a pair of broken eyeglasses. The courier confirmed that his partner was a smoker and said the glasses looked like those McGosh needed when he drove. The technicians collected and marked the items as evidence.
Davis 44 to Davis
Detective
41.
Tom Clayton is a senior investigator for the Glendale Police Department.
On the 211. 10-4. I think the first thought when we saw the van missing was the driver took off with the money and was going to leave town. We also considered somebody could have robbed him. With the glasses laying there, we weren't sure if it's, was it a setup or did something really happen. We explored every possibility we could think of.
Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth, now retired, was the lead for the FBI. The investigators organized a search for the van and its driver, believing that whoever took the van would abandon it soon in favor of a getaway car. They dispatched some officers to begin a ground search around the mall. Pilots from the Arizona Department of Public Safety conducted an aerial search. The DPS officers began at the mall, then widened their search in concentric circles, looking for the van in the surrounding neighborhoods. Whenever they spotted a white van, they radioed ground units to follow up. Special Agent Chenoweth and the others knew most armored car robberies are inside jobs or armed ambushes. Witnesses hadn't heard shooting. Perhaps the driver had decided to trade his hourly wage for $1 million.
Certainly, the van is supposed to be locked and the driver inside, and therefore inaccessible. The fact that the van is missing would lead us to initially at least think about the possibility of the guard driver being involved.
Investigators sought more information on the missing driver.
We investigated John McGosh. First off, we started running his name in the computer to see if we could find any arrests or if he had a criminal history. We started through the Wells Fargo file, his employment file, looking for relatives, friends, where he lived.
After securing a search warrant, investigators traveled to his apartment. His landlady let them in. The investigators were looking for evidence that McGosh had planned the robbery. The apartment appeared undisturbed. Nothing indicated he had planned the robbery or that he was ready to leave town.
Do you know who this is?
Yes. That's Lisa Johnson.
Detectives learned that McGosh had a daughter living nearby in Phoenix. Determining her address through DMV records, they went to interview her.
Glendale Police. Detective Myers, Detective Clayton. Can I talk to you for just a moment?
McGosh's daughter described her father as honest and stable. He took his job seriously. Police found others who said the same. McGosh had no criminal record.
Well, right now, your father and the
Detectives began to consider the 61-year-old grandfather not as a suspect, but as a victim.
John McGosh had a good reputation. We talked to family, friends, relatives, co-workers. He was a person that did not have a lot of requirements in life. Money wasn't a big concern. Based on the background we did on him, we didn't believe he was going to be involved in the crime.
With McGosh eliminated as a suspect, the investigators were back to square one. They needed the public's help.
Certainly when you don't have eyewitnesses, you try and put as much information out in the form of press releases, newspaper articles, things of this nature, in hopes that it would reach somebody that maybe saw something that otherwise had not heard about it.
That afternoon, the FBI and Glendale police held a press
wanted to give you an
conference.
update on bank heist outside the mall earlier. We do know
They released photos and descriptions of the missing van and driver.
as of yet we have very little.
Anyone who had seen John McGosh or the Wells Fargo van was asked to contact the FBI.
Investigation without assistance.
A reward of $60,000 was posted for any tip leading to the recovery of the money and the conviction of those involved.
Anyone who may know where the van is at this point.
Hours later, a 911 call came in from a church in Sun City, Arizona, just outside Glendale. The caller reported a van idling in the church's parking lot. Parishioners arriving for a Monday night bingo game noticed the van, which fit the description in the news reports. License plates and serial numbers confirmed it was the van missing from the mall. Investigators approached cautiously, not knowing who or what was inside. No one was in the driver's seat, but investigators could see the outline of a body on the floor. They tried to open the van, but the armored vehicle was impenetrable, even to the agents.
The engine was going, it was locked, and a cursory examination initially of the inside disclosed the body lying in the center. In order to gain access to the van, of course, we had to call the armored car company.
No one at the church had seen who left the van or what vehicle they used to get away.
Notice anybody else around?
Checking the body through the window, police could see blood on the chest near a Wells Fargo badge. There was no sign of breathing. Authorities believed John McGosh had been killed during the robbery. There were no bullet marks on the van's exterior, no broken glass, and no sign of forced entry at the doors. Whoever had hit the van knew what they were doing.
An armored car robbery is a pretty sophisticated crime, and it takes a lot of detailed planning. And so we knew after finding the van and finding the body that we were up against probably some people who had thought this out very well, planned it extensively, and certainly would not stop at murder in carrying this out.
Investigators needed to get inside the van to know what happened. On November 28, 1994, the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police investigated an armored van hijacked from a mall and abandoned in a church parking lot in nearby Sun City. The driver, 61-year-old John McGosh, lay dead in the cab. He had been shot once in the head, but his death was not instantaneous. Technicians noted aspirated blood spatter, indicating McGosh had continued breathing after being shot. Technicians lifted many latent prints from money cabinets in the van's interior. These would be compared to known prints of employees. No foreign prints were found. No hairs or fibers pointed toward a suspect either. Inside the van, investigators found $132,000 in coins. The cash and checks, estimated at $920,000, were gone. The details of the crime suggested that there had been several violent criminals, according to Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth.
After looking at the van, we knew that we were probably dealing with certainly more than one person, because this would be very difficult for one person to accomplish. So we knew we were looking probably at least 2 or more, and very vicious and violent people who certainly would not stop at anything in order to obtain their goals, which was the money located inside the van.
To Glendale Detective Tom Clayton, the placement of the van outside Glendale city limits spoke to the criminal's understanding of police procedure.
We believed they dumped the van in Sun City to get it out of our jurisdiction into another one, to complicate the investigation and communication of police agencies, maybe hoping we would not be able to link the two things together right away.
During the autopsy of the armored car driver, the medical examiner retrieved several small bullet fragments from the left side of the victim's head. The fragments were too damaged to determine the make of the murder weapon. It seemed like a small caliber, perhaps a .22. The medical examiner found no powder burns on the victim's head. This meant he had been shot from a distance. Magash's partner said the driver often smoked a cigarette while waiting in the van. Though it was against company policy, he usually opened his door to let the smoke out. Investigators believed the killers knew this and shot him when he opened the door. Because of his experience tracking down elusive criminals, now retired FBI Special Agent Ron Myers was transferred from the Fugitive Task Force to work the case. From the beginning, he knew they were not hunting amateurs.
One of the things they did that made us think that they were professionals was the manner in which they did the robbery. They picked an isolated part of the shopping center where not many people parked, where there wouldn't be many witnesses. They drove through the type of neighborhoods where there weren't many people out during the day, and they picked an empty parking lot of a church that had no one at it during the day.
Go right in here, sir.
Investigators received dozens of calls to their tip line. One witness came forward, claiming to have some information that might be helpful. He said he had seen a white van quickly leaving the mall at the time in question. A red pickup truck followed not far behind, but he wasn't sure if the two vehicles were together. Investigators were frustrated that no one saw the actual ambush at the mall.
We couldn't find any eyewitnesses. And when you don't really know what happened, or you don't have somebody that can tell you what maybe transpired with the van, it's a mystery.
With no other solid leads, investigators canvassed the neighborhoods between the mall and the church. Perhaps someone there had witnessed something. Edward Morgan, a resident of Sun City, recalled that he had seen the van. On the afternoon of November 28th, Mr. Morgan was returning from the post office when he noticed the van.
And Mr. Morgan stopped because he thought they weren't going to stop for the stop sign and was afraid he'd be hit. At that time, he noticed the white van with this red truck shortly behind it, both speeding through the intersection and driving off. And he thought that was kind of unusual, not only the way they were driving, but the way that the red truck seemed to be following the white van.
Mr. Morgan couldn't recall details of license plates or the face of the van's passenger. Desperate for a break, investigators wanted to place him under hypnosis to jog his memory. Morgan agreed to travel to Texas with the investigators. There they met with a forensic hypnotist. Perhaps under hypnosis,
Yes.
the witness could remember more details about the incident. Statements made under hypnosis cannot be used in court, but some police
Young man,
agencies find it to be a helpful
long
investigative tool. Under hypnosis, Morgan returned to the events of November 28th. He recalled the white van and the man in the passenger seat. Investigators now believe there were at least 3 people involved in the heist, 2 in the van and 1 in the red truck. When asked about the truck's license plate, Morgan was able to remember a portion.
237. Very good.
It wasn't much, but it gave investigators a start.
We had to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to run all combinations of those license numbers, and that produced several hundred possible vehicles because Arizona does not have color on their motor vehicle registration. So we knew we were looking for a particular type of truck, but from looking at the motor vehicle registrations, we didn't know what color they were on the registration, which meant we had to do interviews of everybody on the list.
Investigators eventually tracked down hundreds of truck owners. Each was interviewed, but no suspect emerged. With his refreshed memory of the van's passenger, Morgan worked with a police sketch artist. There was no guarantee that the details recalled through hypnosis were accurate, but authorities were ready to try almost anything.
Yes.
The FBI released the drawing to the media.
For nearly a month now, police and FBI have continued looking for suspects in the global armored
The FBI and Glendale, Arizona police believed 3 men were involved in the robbery homicide. Yet, as the end of 1994 approached, they still didn't have suspects. It began to look like the killers might never be found.
Martha, do you have the TV on?
But the investigators did not know that the suspect in the composite sketch had been recognized.
Call me back in like 10 minutes.
By December of 1994, a month after the deadly hijacking of an armored car in Glendale, Arizona, the investigation had stalled. Investigators believed at least 3 people pulled off the heist. They had a composite sketch of one and little else. Then, on December 31st, the investigators received a call. A Mesa, Arizona detective had been told that a local woman had information about the crime.
Okay, thanks.
A background check showed that the woman had a suspended license. This would make it easy to bring her in for questioning without arousing suspicions. The FBI asked local law enforcement to pick her up on the suspended license charge.
We understand that you were driving under...
The investigators asked the woman if she knew anything about the armored car robbery in Glendale. She claimed that she didn't have any real information, but she knew someone who did.
We talked on the phone just a few days ago.
Could you write it down for us, please?
She told investigators that her friend, Judy Espinoza, had talked to her after the news reports of the robbery.
Looks just like him.
Espinoza suspected that her boyfriend might have been involved.
Are you watching it? Right. Right. They're saying he might be connected with the armor.
The woman told the investigators where Espinoza worked. The investigators spoke with Espinoza.
Good afternoon, Miss Espinoza.
They asked her about the robbery, reminding her that interfering with a federal investigation was itself a crime. She agreed to answer their questions. She explained that her boyfriend, James Greenham, who went by the nickname Yoda, had asked her what she would do if he held up an armored car and suddenly had a lot of money. She told FBI Special Agent Ron Myers that Greenham sometimes worked as a bounty hunter and was usually broke.
Jim never had a dime, but the day of the robbery, he came home that night, told her he had to kill somebody, and he had plenty of cash on his person. She told us that Jim did his bounty hunting with a guy named Tim Ring, and that she had been over to Ring's house and noticed several new all-terrain vehicles, jet skis, a new motorcycle, and Tim had made a comment about how she'd never know how much money was in that garage.
The information was good, but it was only hearsay. Investigators needed more solid evidence. Espinoza had kept several rolls of coins that Greenham had given her. The wrappers were consistent with those used by merchants on the armored van's route. More than a month after the crime, the investigators finally had names. They looked into the two suspects' backgrounds. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth was familiar with the name of one of the men. Tim Ring had been used as an informant in other FBI cases.
We had paid him for some information that he had furnished us in the past, and you know, in order for us to get information from informants, you aren't dealing with priests and with you know good people. You're dealing with bad guys out there, and Ring's a bad guy.
And when you're ready, focused, squeeze the trigger.
Tim Ring and James Greenham had worked as prison guards in Phoenix and now worked bounty hunter jobs together.
Front sight or through the crosshairs.
Both had many hours of firearms training.
Any questions? Okay, Joe.
Ring was an expert marksman.
Fire when ready.
Pursuing bounty hunters would be dangerous.
The fact that these suspects had law enforcement training in their background made the case pretty difficult. For one, they would be schooled in surveillance techniques. If they were looking for somebody following them, they'd know what to look for. They'd know what to expect anybody following them to do. So we had to be very cautious when we were following them around.
The FBI and Glendale police began 24-hour ground and air surveillance. They had to be covert.
You know, if they're looking for air surveillance, they're looking up, you know. Well, we're way over here because we can't see anything if we're right up here, you know. So we're way over here, way over here.
The agents wanted to see how the pair earned money and how much they spent.
At the time that we were following Mr. Greenham and Mr. Ring around, neither one was gainfully employed that we could tell. They had no income coming in from any legitimate sources, yet we observed them spending a lot of money.
Ring overhauled his truck and Greenham got a new apartment.
How you doing?
Both bought motorcycles. Agents tracked their purchases. It seemed the suspects did not exceed a certain level in order to avoid the attention of the Internal Revenue Service.
Okay.
And they always seemed to be careful whenever they spent their money to stay under the $10,000 limit, knowing that if they spent more than that in cash, the expenditure would be reported by the businesses to the IRS.
Investigators continued tailing Ring and Greenham, building a list of associates. They photographed everyone the suspects met. They still didn't know who the third partner was. Glendale detective Tom Clayton hoped surveillance would spot the three meeting somewhere.
We would watch them go to restaurants where they would meet. We would see them go to strip clubs where they met a couple dancers that they knew.
Everywhere they went, the suspects spent a lot of cash, unaware that investigators were watching. Circumstantial evidence linked them to the robbery and homicide. But the FBI and Glendale police still didn't know exactly what had happened and who else was involved. Somehow, the investigators had to get inside the bounty hunter's shadowy world. As the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police continued to investigate a deadly armored car heist, they got a tip from an associate of their two main suspects. Bounty hunter Michael Sanders said that he had cased armored cars with two other men. He believed those men did the Glendale hit without him. Angry at being cut out of the deal, he decided to talk. He gave FBI Special Agent Ron Myers a lead on the third perpetrator.
Sanders came forward to tell us that he thought that Tim Ring and Jim Greenham were involved in this armored car robbery, and that an ex-Phoenix police officer named Fergie, who worked for a camera shop in the Paradise Valley Mall, might be the third man.
Investigators needed to identify Fergie.
So what we're going to do is
they reviewed their case
set up on
photos.
Tonight, try to take some pictures and get a bunch for that guy there too.
Surveillance teams had watched Ring and Greenham meeting with a bearded man who drove a Camaro. The car was registered to William Ferguson. Since Sanders said Fergie was an ex-cop, Glendale detective Tom Clayton checked the personnel records of the Phoenix Police Department.
As we investigated William Ferguson's background, we found he retired at 20 years from the Phoenix Police Department, and his retirement was precipitated by some disciplinary problems.
Investigators began surveillance on Ferguson. They saw that the ex-cop met often with the other suspects and was also spending a lot of cash. Agents believed they had identified the three men responsible for the robbery and murder.
The investigation was affected by the three suspects having law enforcement training because we knew that they were going to cover evidence, and they were also known to have firearms training, which made them dangerous to the surveillance officers.
Detectives and agents needed evidence linking the men to the crime. During surveillance, they began trash pulls, confiscating trash bags from the suspects in the hopes that some clues might surface. FBI technicians examined the trash. In rings, they found several 3x5 index cards. Each card had notes detailing armored car routes. Analysis confirmed the handwriting was Ring's. But investigators needed more. They wanted tapes of the suspects discussing the crime. All three men had keys to James Greenham's apartment. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth believed they used the apartment as headquarters.
Timothy Ring was married, had a wife, children, and I think the likelihood of discussions occurring in regards to this armored car robbery at his house were somewhat remote. But we felt that they were occurring at Greenham's residence, so that was the impetus for which we decided to go ahead and proceed and place a listening device inside the apartment of Greenham.
Special Agent Myers was part of the team that entered the apartment to place the bug.
When we opened the door to go in, an alarm went off immediately, at which point we shut the door and exited the area. We had to come back at a later time with an expert in alarms, and when we went in the door that time, we learned that it was just a real simple motion detector sitting on top of the refrigerator, and all we had to do was just flip the off switch. It wasn't anything sophisticated at all.
While the team was inside Greenham's apartment, the detective surveilling Tim Ring saw him leave his house. Ring owned a red truck like the one reportedly seen following the van. The detective trailed behind Ring. After a few turns, he realized where the suspect was headed. Agents were still in the apartment. Tim Ring was headed that way. Ring often went to Greenham's place, even when Greenham was out. If he went to the apartment, he would interrupt the planting of the bug.
His license is under suspension. Then run his place.
The team inside needed more time.
I'll pull him over and hold him until you get her.
The detective called in a uniformed officer to stop Ring for speeding. Anything to delay the suspect.
Good evening, sir. What's the problem?
The officer lectured Ring on the dangers of speeding. Detectives wanted to keep him busy while the team finished at the apartment.
Let's go, gang. They're on their way over. Okay, put everything away. Let's get this thing back.
They made it out just before Ring arrived.
Stuff, some notices in the rec center.
Investigators also tapped the home and cellular phones of the two other suspects. To get them talking, Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth released false information about the case.
We decided to make a press release talking about the investigation, which we thought when they would hear would certainly generate some telephone conversations and other discussions amongst these three suspects. And it did have its desired effect in that they did talk about the information that we released and how accurate they thought it was and whether or not we were on the right trail and whether or not they thought we were getting close to them.
As the suspects talked, the investigators listened.
We didn't get an actual confession where they said, I did the armored car robbery. What we got were several conversations among themselves about different aspects of the case. They would always listen to the news, follow any printed reports or follow any television stories, and as soon as anything would appear on TV, they'd call each other. And they'd make comments like, well, this isn't the way it happened. You know, they'll never find that license plate.
The evidence against the suspects was building.
Man, you seen Judy lately?
But prosecutors wanted more direct statements about the crime before they ordered arrests. Investigators provoked the suspects one more time. A Glendale detective went to James Greenham's apartment when the suspect was out. On the door, he left his business card with the note, Lead 173. Investigators watched Greenham's response to the card. He knew what the note meant. The authorities considered him a lead. Greenham became distraught. He sped away from his apartment, calling Tim Ring on his cell phone. Agents kept watch from an airplane and listened in on the phone taps.
Yeah, Tim, man, listen.
Greenham drove out into the desert before stopping.
Business card in my door.
Look, man, they ain't got nothing on you. Don't worry about it.
Ring tried to calm Greenham down, promising that the authorities had nothing on them.
Everything's, don't worry about it.
But Greenham said he was scared.
I can't do this anymore.
He even threatened to commit suicide.
Just don't do something
Finally,
stupid.
Ring talked Greenham down, convincing him the authorities were not onto them.
But if I see one more cop,
Greenham said that if another cop contacted him, he was going to bury the money. It seemed a direct reference to the crime.
Sam 40.
The investigators felt they
Contact
finally
unknown
had enough
suspects,
evidence.
Greenway and 6th Avenue. Continuing search northbound.
They sent units to arrest Greenham and Ferguson.
Jim Greenham was arrested by one team. William Ferguson was arrested by another and attempted to resist arrest but was quickly subdued. Tim Ring was lured down to the FBI office on the premise of looking at some photographs because Ring had previously offered to help the FBI try to find who these people were, which we believe was an effort on his part to try and find out what we knew.
The FBI agent who had previously used Ring as an informant called the suspect. Ring agreed to come in. On February 16, 1995, Tim Ring arrived at the Phoenix FBI field office. Undercover agents were waiting for him in the lobby. They believed he would not be armed at the FBI office, but they couldn't be positive. To ensure their safety, they needed to surprise him.
We had two big burly defensive tactics instructors, one of which was a guy with 25 years of martial arts expertise who came up and blocked him in the head and knocked him down like a sack of potatoes before he knew what he was doing.
All three suspects were off the streets. Now investigators needed physical evidence to make sure the prosecutions were successful. On February 16, 1995, after arresting 3 men for an armored car robbery and murder, FBI agents and Glendale, Arizona detectives searched the suspects' residences. At the house of Tim Ring, suspected leader of the three, they found important evidence. Investigators recovered a note marked with the initials F, Y, and T. Each initial had a number beneath.
Like serial numbers from
The numbers added up to the amount of cash taken from the armored car. Agents believed F stood for Fergie, Y for Greenham's nickname Yoda, and T for Tim. It was the worksheet the three used to divide the money. In the garage, investigators found a red pickup truck that resembled the vehicle seen by witness Edward Morgan in Sun City. The license plate number, however, did not match the ones Morgan recalled under forensic hypnosis. Ring kept several weapons and plenty of ammunition at his house. In a duffel bag, agents also recovered $270,000 in cash. Another $64,000 was found
Let's
at
get it all in a
Ferguson's
stack.
house.
We need to count all of it.
Nearly $600,000 in cash had been stolen. Noting the money spent by the suspects, investigators found that about $100,000 was unaccounted for. The case against the three suspects seemed solid. FBI Special Agent Ron Myers hoped the evidence might get one of them to roll.
We finally got first-hand information about this crime when Jim Greenham decided to cooperate. Jim Greenham was the only one of the three of them that showed any remorse about what they had done, about how they had killed this driver. Jim decided to cooperate. He told us what happened. He told us all the parts that these individuals played in the robbery.
Greenham met with the investigators and explained that the planning started in the fall of 1994.
Ferguson and I just watched when
Tim Ring had the idea to hit an armored car.
I wasn't crazy about the fact that he was going to kill him. What were you planning on
So they began to case Wells Fargo vehicles. They drove around Glendale, following different trucks and vans on their routes. Then they zeroed in on the van driven by John McGosh, tailing it for days.
They managed to observe this one particular armored car making several stops, and they noticed that every time the messenger would get out to make a delivery, the driver would open the door about 8 inches to smoke and blow the smoke out the side of the door. They observed the driver at several stops, and they noticed this one particular stop on the back side of a shopping center, and noticed that he always parked in the same position.
On November 28, 1994, the Monday after Thanksgiving, a day they were sure a lot of money would be in the van, they were ready to strike. James Greenham and William Ferguson waited unnoticed by the store. They watched until the courier was out of sight. As if on schedule, McGosh opened the door to smoke. Tim Ring was parked 50 feet away, a stolen license plate on his truck. The expert marksman had a silencer on his .22 caliber rifle, so no one would hear the shot. He aimed through the opening and fired once. The force must have knocked McGosh's glasses to the ground. With the driver down, the van was unprotected. No one noticed the vehicle speed away. They drove to the church parking lot. It would be empty at that time of day. They transferred the money and checks to the pickup. They knew authorities would be searching for the van. They left most of the coins and went to destroy the checks and other evidence, according to Detective Tom Clayton.
They loaded the money into Tim Ring's truck and drove out in the desert, where they separated the money, changed clothes, and burned all the evidence.
We buried the license plate.
Greenham said they buried the burned evidence and stolen license plate in the desert.
And you can take us to where the plates are buried?
Yeah.
Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth wondered if it was the plate witnessed by Edward Morgan.
We went out there and actually found the location and then dug it up and found that the 3 numbers actually on the plate did in fact match those that were given to us by Mr. Morgan. So he was actually right on his information.
James Greenham pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed robbery and is serving 27.5 years. William Ferguson pled guilty to armed robbery and accessory after the fact and is doing 17 years. On December 6, 1996, Tim Ring was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and burglary.
Anytime that you have somebody actually assassinate a driver like this, it's a very heinous crime, and you certainly want to expend all of your resources in an effort to identify the people involved and put them behind bars.
For his crimes, Ring received the death penalty. He currently awaits execution at the Arizona State Prison in Florence. In the late 80s, Florida's cocaine imports were among the highest in the nation. Regional territories were enforced with intimidation and murder. One dealer bowed to no one, not even law enforcement. Desperate to stop the violence, authorities turned to the FBI for help.
A suspected drug dealer would stop at nothing to keep local and federal authorities from building a case against him. When his organization started targeting the government itself, federal agencies went on high alert. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. He was a desperate man, driven to desperate measures. Bringing him down would take the combined efforts of the DEA, the ATF, and the FBI.
Fort Myers Beach, Florida, July 18, 1987. It was a Saturday night in a Gulf Coast beach town with a thriving nightlife and a booming drug trade. Away from the tourists, many local residents spent the weekend at private parties. For some, that included cocaine. At one party, several men waited for their friend to return with more drugs. He'd been gone for about a half an hour when they heard what sounded like gunshots at around 10 p.m. The owner of the car, whose vehicle was used for the drug run, saw that it was now parked out front. Inside, he found his friend shot to death. The Lee County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. A forensic technician found only one identifiable fingerprint on the car. It belonged to the vehicle's owner. Lying close to the driver's door were 7 empty .22 caliber shell casings. Investigators determined the victim had been shot at close range. An autopsy would reveal 8 bullet wounds in his upper body and traces of cocaine in his bloodstream. The owner of the car said the dead man was his friend, 29-year-old Craig Karen. Reluctantly, he told homicide detectives that the victim had left earlier to buy cocaine. The victim's girlfriend suggested police should question her boyfriend's cocaine dealer.
Has he been bound before?
He owed the dealer money for drugs. The dealer had a reputation for violence. Lee County homicide detective Tom Continos learned the dealer's name was Jeff Saganek.
Jeff is a young kid from Fort Myers Beach who had established himself as what I thought to be a mid-level drug dealer on the beach. Through talking to Craig's associates, I learned that Craig owed Jeff a large amount of money. And the reputation was that you better pay your bills with Jeff or he's going to send someone to collect it.
The next day, an unexpected visitor appeared at the Lee County Sheriff's Department. It was the alleged cocaine dealer himself, 23-year-old Jeff Saganek. He asked to see the detective investigating the previous night's killing. He wanted to give a statement. The reputed dealer, with a history of arrests, heard he might be a suspect and wanted to set the record straight. On the night of the murder, Jeff Saganek claimed that he and his girlfriend were at a restaurant for a late dinner. He said that he had talked to the victim in the parking lot just before the couple sat down to eat. After a few minutes, the man left. The reputed dealer said he and his girlfriend were at the restaurant from about 9:45 until 11 p.m. And he had more to offer than his word. Jeff Saganek handed the detective his restaurant receipt. The waitress who served them confirmed the story.
Yeah, I'll talk to her. Maybe we'll slide by the restaurant and see.
It appeared he had an airtight alibi. But to the seasoned detective, it seemed Jeff Saganek was trying too hard to cover his tracks.
I had investigated enough homicides to see all different types of suspects and how they react and the reasons why they commit murder. For this young kid to come in, as well organized as he was, with an alibi, with witnesses, with receipts, he became my #1 suspect.
On a tip, the detective questioned a member of a local rock band who was also known to deal cocaine. He admitted that the victim sometimes bought drugs from him directly, which made Jeff Saganek, allegedly the largest dealer on the beach, angry over the lost sales. At about 11:15 on the night of the murder, Jeff Saganek came to the lounge where he was playing. According to the performer, Jeff Saganek boasted that he had just had the victim wasted and that it would teach the people of Fort Myers Beach a lesson. The musician's story was one of many over the next several months that confirmed what police already suspected. But even in the underworld of Fort Myers Beach, rumors and innuendo were not evidence of murder.
Everything that I got was hearsay. No one would really give me sworn testimony that says, I saw this, or I saw that, or I know this and I know that. It was all he said, she said type of intelligence information, which is maybe okay for drug cases, but not with murder investigations. You need sworn testimony of people who actually saw something happen.
Then, in the summer of 1988, over a year after the murder, the detective finally got a break. A young woman came forward, claiming to have witnessed the killing. She had not spoken up sooner because she was addicted to drugs and was protecting her former supplier, Jeff Saganek.
Craig Karen. He had it hidden.
Now she was clean and wanted to tell detectives what she had seen on the night of July 18th, 1987.
But when he told me to go.
She was on her way to the cocaine party that evening when she witnessed the shooting. The gunman was her former boyfriend, a man who worked for Jeff Saganek. But the detective would be unable to speak to her boyfriend directly. Just a few months after the murder, her boyfriend had committed suicide. She told police that she also had direct knowledge about Jeff Saganek and his organization. The woman said Jeff and his right-hand man operated out of a local pizza parlor that Saganek owned. The dealer stored his drugs and money at several different locations and moved between them to avoid detection. Few people knew where he actually lived. Jeff Saganek had many people on his payroll, but she knew only a handful. Her former boyfriend was one of them. Hired by Jeff Saganek to do whatever the dealer needed done. She and Jeff had also had an arrangement. In exchange for storing drugs and guns at her apartment, Jeff had paid her rent.
All right, I'll see you in the morning, okay?
Unable to corroborate her story with other testimony or physical evidence, the detective could not charge Jeff Zaganek with the murder.
I followed up on those leads, and I was not able to substantiate any of the information that she gave me at that point. So without the trigger man, without a gun, without eyewitness testimony, I couldn't get to Jeff. I couldn't get to Jeff. I had no physical evidence, no testimonial evidence that enabled me to bring charges against Jeff.
The homicide detective looked to the Lee County Narcotics Unit for help. Detectives began surveillance on Jeff Zaganek's pizza parlor, hoping to identify someone they could turn against the dealer. The place was a popular spot. It would take time for officers to discern the drug traffickers from the legitimate customers. To complicate matters, Jeff Zaganek changed his name legally to Jeff Matthews, presumably to sever ties to his past crimes.
Jeff was the type of person where he wanted to be a clean-cut businessman. Jeff even went to the point of changing his name from Jeff Zaganek to Jeff Matthews to try and help him with his reputation.
Over several weeks, investigators noted which people frequented Jeff Matthews' place without picking up any food. Investigators spotted one man who visited often. A license plate check revealed his name was Stephen Franken. Detectives speculated that Franken might be their connection to Jeff Matthews. Investigators called DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam, who was already familiar with Stephen Franken. Agents believed Franken was a low-level cocaine dealer who procured his supply from Jeff Matthews, but they had no proof. To link the two men, Agent Bolam hoped to use an informant close to Franken.
I received some information from cooperating source that Mr. Franken was distributing cocaine out of his house on Hibiscus Street in Fort Myers Beach, and that he was distributing to quite a few people down at the Fort Myers Beach area.
Their informant, recently arrested for possession, was one of Stephen Franken's biggest customers. For his cooperation in controlled drug buys from Franken, the informant would receive probation. If the purchases were successful, agents would be able to arrest Franken, then press him for direct testimony about Jeff Matthews and his organization.
Stephen Franken was important to the investigation. He had quite a bit of knowledge as far as drug trafficking that was taking place down at Fort Myers Beach, and with Jeffrey Matthews' participation in this drug trafficking.
The informant returned with cocaine. After several more buys, DEA agents finally had what they needed to make an arrest. On August 25, 1988, agents secured a felony arrest warrant for Stephen Franken for the sale and distribution of a controlled substance. Once Franken was in custody, agents searched his house. Inside, they found prepackaged cocaine, scales, and cash. In exchange for a shorter sentence, Franken agreed to cooperate with agents. He admitted that murder suspect Jeff Matthews was his cocaine supplier and consented to say so in front of the grand jury. Franken was released on bond until then. As investigators continued to hunt for evidence in their case against Matthews, deputies in nearby Collier County, Florida, responded to a crime scene. On October 2nd, 1988, a surveyor had discovered fully clothed, skeletonized human remains in a rural dump site. It appeared the body had been there for the past several weeks. Though there was no wallet or other ID, detectives did notice a paper bracelet on the victim's wrist, similar to those used by hospitals and nightclubs. Investigators gathered dental records from local families who had recently reported their loved ones as missing. They hoped one of them would match the unknown victims. The dental records, along with the body, were sent to the medical examiner for comparison. He first determined that the victim was a white male in his 20s, killed execution style with 5 .38 caliber bullets to the head. From the body's wrist, the ME removed the paper bracelet. He confirmed it was an admission ban from a nightclub in Fort Myers Beach. Dental records from a missing 22-year-old man last seen leaving the club confirmed that the murder victim was Thomas Sellers. A Collier County Sheriff's detective visited Sellers' father to give him the bad news.
Questions in reference to that. Has he been doing any illegal activities or hanging around anybody lately that...
The father told the detective that his son had a cocaine problem and believed the young man owed his dealer, Jeff Matthews, $1,000. It was also rumored that his son was last seen leaving the club with a man reputed to be a hitman for the dealer. But once again, investigators were unable to find evidence to corroborate the rumors.
Aware of him. Do you have any pictures of your son?
Agents and detectives' only direct witness to Matthews' operation was Stephen Franken, a low-level dealer arrested months earlier. They hoped his grand jury testimony would be enough to arrest a cocaine supplier suspected of ordering 2 executions. On January 27, 1990, as the DEA and Lee County, Florida sheriffs continued to pursue suspected cocaine dealer and murderer Jeff Matthews, detectives received a call about another possible homicide. At around midnight, a man was unpacking boxes in his new home when he heard the sound of a car squealing towards his house. The vehicle didn't stop until it reached his backyard. Inside, the driver was dead. Lee County Detective Tom Continos was one of the first to arrive at the home in St. Carlos Park.
Initially, I was told it was a motor vehicle accident. There was a dead body in the car. And the closer I looked, the more I realized that he didn't die from a car accident. He died from a bunch of bullet holes.
The driver's license found on the victim identified the dead man as 22-year-old Stephen Franken, the primary witness scheduled to testify against drug kingpin Jeff Matthews at a grand jury hearing just 2 days away. It seemed Matthews was aware that without Franken's testimony, investigators wouldn't have enough evidence to bring an indictment against the cocaine dealer, suspected in 2 killings and now a 3rd. According to DEA Special Agent Dennis Boland,
I think the timing of the murder was because of the timing of the grand jury, the information we received as far as Jeffrey Matthews being involved in other shootings and murders at Fort Myers Beach, and that Stephen Franken had some valuable information as far as Jeffrey Matthews' drug operation.
But now the grand jury would never learn what Franken knew about Matthews. The federal witness was likely dead before he crashed.
Detectives decided to search the surrounding area to determine where the shooting had taken place.
Something happened before the guy hit the house, or else he wouldn't have driven through the house. So I walked down the dirt road about several hundred yards, and I found what looked like some attempt at a roadblock.
Large and small branches covered the road, strewn by what must have been a vehicle. To the left side of the site, detectives found several .22 caliber shell casings, the same caliber as the bullets later removed from Stephen Franken's body. Footprints, as well as tire impressions from a separate vehicle, were discovered close by in the loose dirt. Technicians made plaster casts for later comparison should a vehicle or suspect be located. From their placement in Franken's wounds, officers determined that the shooter had fired at the driver's side of the car.
My immediate thoughts were that someone had constructed this roadblock to slow a car down, slow the car down enough where someone can jump out of some brushy area that's along both sides of the road and shoot the person driving that car.
The gunman must have known when Franken left work and the route he traveled home. The victim probably stopped briefly when he saw debris in the road, just long enough for the shooter to take accurate aim. Clinging to life for a few more moments, he likely accelerated down the road and into the house. Though suspected murderer and drug dealer Jeff Matthews was believed responsible, investigators were once again left with no direct evidence tying Matthews to the crime. The fact that Stephen Franken had been a federal witness enabled authorities to broaden the investigation to include the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI. Together, they needed to develop a strategy to snare Jeff Matthews and put an end to the violence. Retired Special Agent Guy Notley was part of the team.
The FBI immediately started working with the Lee County Sheriff's Office and the Drug Enforcement Administration. There was nothing done without telling the other agency involved that what was going on. The FBI did have a lot of manpower that they could put on this matter. They did have tremendous ability for the technical aspect of the investigation.
They knew Matthews was still operating in the area, but the dealer was well insulated. The only way to get to him was through his drug operation and employees. But after the informant Franken was murdered, finding someone else to cooperate would be no easy task.
What made it so difficult was that we didn't have a lot of people come forward and voluntarily supply information on Jeffrey Matthews. Most of the people knew that he was capable of committing murders, and they were intimidated by him.
Agents turned to a man behind bars whom they believed had been an insider in Matthews' organization. Serving a 10-year sentence on concealed weapons charges, the Fort Myers Beach, Florida man was reputed to be one of Matthews' former hitmen. He agreed to tell what he knew about the dealer's drug operation in exchange for a shortened sentence. Just before his arrest, the alleged hitman admitted that Matthews had ordered him to surveil Stephen Franken to learn the man's schedule. With that information, Matthews would be able to silence Franken before he could testify against him. The convict denied knowing who actually pulled the trigger, since he was behind bars before the murder took place. He did tell investigators about another unsolved homicide he claimed that Matthews had committed. He said that one night at the pizza parlor, a contractor was repairing the tiles on the kitchen floor after the restaurant closed.
That's right. Yes, with the sounds.
The hitman had brought over a new silencer for Matthews' gun.
No one's gonna hear anything. No one hear anything. I think
through the weight.
It's a heavy gun.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah, how's that? Nice target. Great.
He claimed the drug lord killed the contractor just to test the silencer. Agents hoped to get Matthews to corroborate the hitman's stories. The convict agreed to call Matthews to set up a recorded meeting. He asked Matthews to come by the prison to drop off some new music tapes. Matthews agreed.
Hi. Hi.
Agents would be ready to record the conversation on audio and video, hoping Matthews would incriminate himself.
We received approvals from the U.S. Attorney's Office as well as the jail to install these recorders. Then after we installed everything, he never did show up. Jeffrey Matthews is very elusive, surveillance conscious. He insulated himself pretty well. Even his closest friends didn't know where he was residing at.
Matthews' last suspected victim may have known. But because he was silenced, the alleged murderer remained free and was becoming more desperate. By early 1990, the FBI, DEA, and Florida authorities continued to pursue suspected drug lord and murderer Jeff Matthews. Since 1988, he had been implicated in 4 executions in the Fort Myers Beach area. For Lee County homicide detective Tom Continos and dozens of agents, a lack of hard evidence and verifiable witness statements kept Jeff Matthews just out of reach.
2 years have gone by and I still couldn't get my hands around Jeff Matthews. There was nothing there for me to follow up on. It was dead end after dead end after dead end. All the time I knew Jeff was my #1 suspect, and he was getting stronger and stronger and bolder on his criminal activities on the beach, and it was very frustrating.
On February 12, 1990, a judge agreed that investigators had enough circumstantial evidence against Matthews to search the dealer's pizza place, the likely headquarters for his operation. They served the warrant after hours to avoid endangering customers.
Upstairs, down here.
From the restaurant, investigators seized documents, phone records, and bank and credit card statements. They also confiscated Matthews' Trans Am. The tire treads were compared to impressions found at one of the murder scenes. The results were negative. Upstairs from the pizza parlor, investigators searched an apartment where Matthews was rumored to sometimes stay with his girlfriend. The couple was not there, nor did the searchers find any cocaine. But they did recover silver-tip .357 cartridges.
45 caliber cartridges. 22 calibers.
Cash, additional phone records, and most importantly, .22 caliber bullets. The same caliber used in at least 3 of the 4 executions. They were sent to the crime lab to be compared with the spent .22 caliber rounds retrieved from the victims. Tests of the bullets' metallurgic composition did not reveal any matches. It was one more dead end in a grueling case. Though there was no direct evidence linking the alleged drug dealer to the murders, DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam and his team believed they had enough to indict Jeff Matthews and several associates as part of a continuing criminal enterprise.
We had concerns at that point that by leaving him out on the street, he could commit additional murders. So we felt we had sufficient evidence at that point, and that's the reason why we went and got the indictments to go pick him up.
But Matthews was nowhere to be found. Friends and associates claimed that he had left Fort Myers for parts unknown. His girlfriend, also named in the indictment, agreed to cooperate with investigators to help locate the fugitive. Through a tapped phone line, she made contact with Matthews on his cell.
Hello?
Hey, it's me.
Hey,
The suspected murderer refused to say where he was.
don't worry about where I am.
It's kind of hard to get in touch with somebody.
She told him she was worried about the indictments.
If I find out who ratted on us, I'm gonna kill him.
Matthews vowed that he would find out who was talking to authorities and kill them, plain and simple.
Where are you?
Yeah.
He hung up seconds later. The next day, a confidential informant gave Lee County homicide detectives a promising tip. They learned that Matthews had rented a car with a borrowed credit card on the night Stephen Franken was murdered.
Here's a picture. Can you tell us a little bit about the case?
An evidence technician compared the tire treads from the rental car to a plaster cast of the tracks collected at the scene of the ambush. They matched. It was the first hard evidence linking Matthews to one of the 4 murders. Unfortunately, it didn't prove that Matthews had driven the rental car to the crime scene, nor that he had pulled the trigger.
We were trying to gather as much information about Matthews as we could. We weren't even successful in finding out where this guy lived. We heard he lived in this big house. We heard he lived in that big house. He drove this car. He drove that car. But he was never there. We were never able to pin him down to where he lived. We only knew that he drove one car, and that's a black Trans Am. He was like, you know, he was everywhere but nowhere.
Then on the night of March 16, 1990, Lee County detectives responded to a call from the home of a Fort Myers Beach fire inspector. A pipe bomb was thrown into his driveway. Filled with .38 caliber bullets, the explosion sent ammunition and shrapnel ripping through the inspector's car and house. It also damaged a storage shed and a neighboring home. No one was injured. The inspector said he had no idea who might be responsible. Detectives asked him for a list of businesses that had failed any recent fire inspections.
You got any problems with anybody?
One name stood out.
Jeff Matthews.
I responded to that scene, learned that this fire inspector conducted a fire inspection of Matthews's restaurant and did not give him a very good write-up as far as the fire conditions of the restaurant. Once I heard that, I said, this is Jeff sending this guy a message.
But if it was Matthews, he had left no trace. All police had to go on was the spotty testimony of a neighbor. The neighbor had heard tires squeal just before the explosion. When he looked outside, he saw a white hatchback race away. It had been too dark to see the license plate. If Matthews had been involved, Detective Continos pondered his change in tactics.
And I remember thinking that was a significant change in Jeff's operation. Before, he was targeting other drug dealers. Now he's targeting government officials, being that he was a Fort Myers Beach fire inspector. That is something different that Jeff was doing.
The detective returned home well after midnight. He tried to unwind, hoping to get some sleep. At about 2 a.m., the sound of an explosion sent him rushing to the window.
That sounded like a transformer blowing up, a car backfiring, fireworks. I mean, there's a number of things that happen in my neighborhood that sound could possibly occur. Phone rings 2 or 3 minutes later. It's one of my associates who's on the DEA task force, says, Tom, the DEA building just got blown up.
The Fort Myers DEA office was moments away from the detective's house.
from the first one on the scene, and I saw the entire DEA building engulfed in flames that are hundreds of feet high. I mean, it was an incredible sight for me.
Investigators immediately suspected fugitive Jeff Matthews. It was the first bombing of a DEA office in U.S. history. 30 firefighters battled the blaze for almost an hour. Dozens of agents, U.S. Marshals, and deputies from 6 neighboring counties were also called into help. FBI Special Agent Guy Notley was among them.
When I arrived on the morning of the bombing, on March 17th, DEA agents informed me that the suspect in this matter was most likely an individual that they indicted 2 days before, Jeffrey Matthews.
If this was the work of Jeff Matthews, the cocaine dealer's violence had escalated to horrific proportions. When law enforcement becomes the target, no one is safe. And Matthews was still on the run. On March 17, 1990, 2 days after a federal grand jury indicted suspected drug lord and murderer Jeff Matthews, the DEA office in Fort Myers Beach, Florida was firebombed. Agents suspected Matthews was responsible, but he was still at large. The FBI and Lee County Detective Tom Continos believed the fugitive was also the prime suspect in another bombing that occurred just hours earlier.
We realized that in all likelihood, that the pipe bomb at the fire inspector's house was a diversionary tactic to pull law enforcement resources away from the patrolling area of the DEA building in order for Matthews to firebomb the DEA office.
By dawn, all that remained of the building was a burned-out shell. Investigators now began the task of assessing what was left, how it happened, and where the evidence was buried, hoping to identify the perpetrator. FBI Special Agent Guy Notley called in specialists from headquarters.
We brought in bomb technicians from our laboratory in Washington, D.C., as well as some FBI agents from the Tampa division to conduct investigation. The investigation consisted of going through all the debris that was left at the site, basically by taking it through a shovel and sifting through till we found out what incendiary device that's used.
They determined that the fire was caused by a pipe bomb taped to 2 5-gallon gas cans and tossed through a window. It landed in the office of DEA agent Dennis Bolam. He believed the aim was no coincidence.
My feeling is Jeffrey Matthews was trying to destroy the evidence in the case, and I had the case files on the Jeffrey Matthews case in a file cabinet right near the window, and amazingly the fire and the explosion went right past it, and everything was intact as far as tape recordings and notes and so forth.
Because of the early hour, no one was injured, but damage was estimated at $4 million. Through scattered witness accounts, investigators pieced together a possible scenario for the bombing. No one knew how many people were involved. But neighbors heard only one car and one door open, then close. Investigators figured those responsible stopped close to the building for a quick hit and run. The bombing had a profound effect on area law enforcement. Agents struggled to deal with the physical reality of the destruction and their emotional reactions.
I was shocked, and then I was angry, and then I was more determined to get him at that point than anything. It's changed my life because I had to have 24-hour guard on my house, as well as the other agents and the prosecutor in the case. I had a wife and 2 small children that I had to worry about, and they had to be protected, and I knew that he was still running around out there, and that there's a possibility that he could do this again.
FBI lab examiners inspected the remnants of the bomb. Nails used as shrapnel were packed into a metal pipe 5 inches in diameter with a unique threading and surrounded with gunpowder. Duct tape held the pipe between 2 5-gallon tanks of gasoline that helped to spread the fire when the bomb went off.
Pretty much familiar with the murders.
100 DEA agents joined the team, and the 4-person FBI office grew to more than 50. Investigators began tracking down where the bomb materials may have been purchased. Teams of agents canvassed every hardware store and gas station for miles around. The pipe used in the bomb had a unique threading. Agents found the store clerk who had sold this unusual item just days before the explosion. The clerk identified Matthews as the customer who had purchased it. Agents asked dozens of gas station employees if they remembered anyone purchasing gas in 2 5-gallon tanks during the past week or so. One remembered that a man fitting Matthews' description had done so recently. The evidence was mounting against the bomber, but agents still had no idea where he was. They interviewed his friends and associates to determine with whom he'd been in contact.
And how do you know Jeffrey?
One told them that he had written to her, begging her not to believe what she read about him in the newspapers. But she had believed the articles and agreed to have her phone monitored so agents might trace a call from Matthews.
Well, that would be great. You'd be willing to do that? I think you could help us.
He was elusive. We never knew where he would be at any given time. He was always on the move. So we utilized a trap and trace. We knew that he utilized a cell phone, and we were trying to zero in exactly where he was.
With a signed affidavit, agents went to the company that handled Matthews' wireless account. If there was a hit on a cell tower from his phone, authorities would be alerted. They discovered he was still in Florida.
We had even aerial surveillance set up in the Orlando area where we found out where his cell phone was coming from to see if when he made a call that we could get people there quickly in an attempt to apprehend him.
But agents were unable to trace Matthews' calls closer than a 2-mile radius. Then investigators received the tip they were hoping for. They raced to a Fort Myers storage facility where the manager had recognized Matthews from the media. The fugitive was presently unloading a truck there. Agents hoped they could get there before the suspected murderer and bomber escaped again. In the spring of 1990, FBI agents raced to arrest 26-year-old fugitive Jeff Matthews, suspected in 4 murders and the bombing of the Fort Myers, Florida DEA building. A team of agents responded to a call from a storage facility manager who had seen the wanted man on his property.
Turn around! Face the opposite direction. Keep your hands up.
Agents approached the suspect, ready to use deadly force. They removed his wallet to check his ID.
Okay.
The man was not Jeff Matthews. After 2 years of pursuit, Lee County, Florida Detective Tom Continos was disappointed, but not discouraged.
I just knew that at some point we were going to get him. He was too active, he was too violent. What concerned me was at what cost before we got him. We just didn't know how long it was going to take and how many dead people it was going to take for us to get there. That was my concern.
Is this where you kept the stuff?
Yes, sir, it is.
All right, thank you.
Investigators received a tip from a realtor who claimed to have rented a house to Jeff Matthews before he was a known fugitive. They found common items, including duct tape and hardware store bags that might be linked to the bombing. Then they came across something that seemed clearly connected to Matthews' crimes. As DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam recalls,
there was a note, and the note was addressed to the Lee County Sheriff's Department. I don't know the exact verbiage that was used in it, but it's something to the effect that, "Catch me if you can."
Catching me because you won't.
investigators sharpened their resolve to find him before anyone else was killed.
Jeffrey.
On April 9th, 1990, Matthews called his friend's tapped phone. Agents were prepared to strike if the woman could keep him on the line.
All right, yeah, I can.
This time he was calling from a payphone, according to FBI Special Agent Guy Notley.
We were able to determine that he was in the Orlando area. Agents were sent to different quadrants where they could be within 10 or 15 minutes of different payphones that we thought maybe Matthews was using.
Field agents waited for the word as precious seconds ticked by. The woman asked him where he was, but Matthews was anxious to hang up. Despite his best efforts, they got the trace. Agents set out to apprehend him before he vanished again.
Our people were able to put a location on where the phone call was coming from. Agents were only about 5 or 10, 15 minutes away. They arrived at the scene. He was still talking when the agents arrived.
FBI, you're under arrest. Show us your hands. Show us your hands.
After almost 3 years of pursuit, investigators arrested Jeff Matthews without incident. To avoid the death penalty, Jeff Matthews pled guilty to supervising a continuing criminal enterprise, committing homicide to further that enterprise, cocaine trafficking, and bombing a federal building. On July 31st, 1990, Matthews asked to speak to DEA and FBI agents. He said they needed to move on something right away or more innocent people would surely be killed. The convicted killer had a storage unit in Gainesville, Florida, loaded with explosives in a booby-trapped van. Agents immediately notified the bomb squad.
I had concerns that he may be trying to set us up. Maybe have his last hurrah before he went away to jail, and that we might be sending some agents into a real dangerous situation.
As Matthews had described, agents found a red van parked inside a storage unit rigged to explode. A bomb squad defused the devices and secured the area. With the booby trap rendered harmless, investigators quickly removed the dozen pipe bombs they found in the van. They also recovered an AR-15, a MAC-10, a MAC-11, and a .22 caliber handgun with a silencer.
There was rubber masks, Halloween masks. There was police raid jackets. There was additional bombs, bomb-making equipment, manuals on how to make bombs, how to make booby traps, fuses and equipment to make bombs, including pieces of piping and timers and so forth.
Matthews also told investigators where they could find the body of the contractor murdered in his pizza parlor more than 2 years earlier, though Matthews claimed that his hitman had done the actual killing. Matthews said he and the hitman had carried the body in a freezer to the house Jeff was renting and buried the victim nearby. It was the same house where investigators had found Matthews' taunting note. They located both the freezer and the body, just where the killer said they would be. For this crime, Matthews pled guilty as an accessory.
Drug dealers just don't start off a business by killing people. And most of them don't kill people. But Jeff was a very violent, organized person. And that made him dangerous, and that made him even harder to catch.
On October 1st, 1990, 26-year-old Jeff Matthews was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never again be free to terrorize the people of Fort Myers Beach, Florida.